Well, hello, my friends. Welcome to Hope for Your Heart. This is Pastor Calvin Corbett with Hickory Ridge Community Church. So glad to have you joining us on another week of broadcast. Now, today and tomorrow, I'm going to talk about this wonderful subject of peace. You know, peace is a choice. And most of the times that we lose our peace is because we're losing our mind. And I want to talk to you about the brain, how God created our brain, how God uses our brain to speak to us. Did you know that the typical brain comprises only about 2% of your total body weight, but it uses about 20% of the energy that you need to function and about 20% of all the oxygen that you breathe in. Now, your brain is 73% water, but if you were to be dehydrated by as little as 2%, it would affect your attention, your memory, and other cognitive skills. And now, the brain is not really that heavy. It only weighs about 3 pounds. As I told you, it's got a lot of water content to it, 73%. But if we would take the water out of your brain, you would discover that your brain is 60% of it is fat. That's right. And so your brain is mostly a fatty organ in your body. And so your brain requires cholesterol. You know, we talk about lowering your cholesterol. Well, not all cholesterol is bad. 25% of the body's cholesterol resides in your brain. So cholesterol is an integral part of every brain cell. So without adequate cholesterol, brain cells begin to die. Now, nobody knows for sure, but the latest estimate is that the brain contains roughly 100 billion brain cells. That's with a B, 100 billion brain cells. You know, each neuron in your brain can transmit 1,000 nerve impulses per second. And it can make as many as tens of thousands of contacts with other neurons. So there's a lot of activity going on inside the brain that God has given us, that God has created. You know, all brain cells are not alike. So far, they've discovered over 33 types of brain cells have been identified, and it's 10,000 types of brain cells. So these 10,000 types of brain cells fit into 3,300 types of brain cells. And it's amazing when you think about it. Now, the brain needs a constant supply of oxygen. As little as 5 minutes without oxygen can cause some of the brain cells to die, leading to severe brain damage. Now, when you think about babies have big heads, and it holds their rapidly growing brains. And then I notice this, my 2-year-old grandson, 80% of his brain is the size of an adult. And that's why, I don't know if you notice this with babies, but, you know, we raise our hand over our head, we probably have 18 inches of our arm that is higher than our head. But you ever notice a little 1-year-old or a 2-year-old, they raise their hands up, and their hands doesn't go too far past their head. That's because their head is pretty good size in proportion to their body, and their arms are short. But, you know, a 2-year-old's brain is 80% the size of an adult. So during developmental periods, 250,000 neurons are added every minute to the brain. So the brain is not really going to get that much larger, but it's going to be developed more. And as any parent of a teen can attest, there was a time where I had 5 teenagers living in my house. Thank the Lord, they're all out of their teens. All my kids now are in their 20s and in their 30s. But as any parent of a teen can tell you, teenagers' brains are not fully developed. And it's not going to happen until about the age of 26. And maybe that's why they decided that your children can stay on your health plan coverage up to the age of 26 if you so choose to have them on there. So when you think about it, your brain is not reaching full maturity until the time that you're age 26. Now, the difficult thing is that a lot of the life-changing decisions that we make before the age of 26. And so I would really encourage you as a young person, make sure that you make decisions wisely. Now, the brain can function and it can process a lot of information, and this information travels super fast, right? As a matter of fact, brain information travels about 268 miles per hour. Now, that's faster than a Formula One race car, which will go up to speeds of about 240 or so. So your brain is able to really process things quickly. Now, what happens to our brain because we process so much information so quickly that 95% of the decisions that we make are actually taking place in our subconscious mind. So the human brain is extremely energy efficient. It's doing all this passing of information. It's reproducing itself. Some of the cells are reproducing itself, but it only takes about 20 watts of electricity to run our brain. Now, to put that in context, this is the same amount that is needed to power a couple of the low wattage LED light bulbs. So the brain is extremely efficient. Now, there's a reason the brain has been called the random thought generator, right? Thoughts are constantly going through our mind. We are so creative with these thoughts that come through our mind. But according to the Laboratory of Neurology Imaging in the University of Southern California, the average brain, and this is amazing when you think about how many thoughts we can generate. The average brain can generate 48.6 thoughts per minute. So every second, almost every second, we are producing a new thought. So that adds up to 70,000 thoughts a day. So every minute as we're going through this process of the blood flowing through our brain, every minute, 750 to 1,000 milliliters of blood flows through our brains. Now, to put that in perspective, that's enough to fill a 1-liter soda bottle every single minute. This is mind-boggling when you think about it. It almost hurts my brain thinking about all that our brains can do. Now, your brain can process an image that your eye has seen for as little as 13 milliseconds. In other words, that's less time than it takes to blink your eye. So you can see something and you can figure out what it is, even if you have seen it less than a second. That blows your mind. Isn't that amazing how our minds are? And we can see something that passes by us and we can quickly discern what it is. You know, there's a lot of things about the brain that are amazing to me. Now, ladies, don't get offended by this, but in general, men's brains are 10% bigger than women's brains, even taking into account that the average man's body size is bigger than the average woman's body size. But when you look at the brain, now, this doesn't mean that men are smarter than women. It just means that we have a bigger brain, right? The size of your brain does not necessarily correlate to how intelligent you are. But when you look at the brain, how God designed the brain of men and how God designed the brain of women, now the hippocampus part of the brain is most strongly related to memory. Did you know that women, as a general rule, have better memories than men? Because that part of the brain most strongly linked to memory in women is larger than in men's brains, even though the man's brain is bigger. And so that's why when something is lost, my kids don't call me if they can't find something at the house, right? They always call mom. And that's because moms have a better ability to remember things. Now, this is good and this is bad, right? Because when you get in trouble with your wife, gentlemen, I promise you, she's going to remember all the details of that argument. And we're going to forget most of what happened, but our wives, they won't forget it, right? Kind of reminds me of the story of a couple who went to the pastor, and they went to the pastor for marriage counseling. And so the pastor sat them down and says, okay, husband, why don't you tell me why you think the marriage is falling apart? And then to the wife, why do you think this marriage is falling apart? Well, the husband began and he says, well, we've been married for 25 years. And every time we get into an argument, my wife gets so hysterical. The husband pauses for a minute and says, no, hold on, you mean hysterical, right? She gets all worked up. And the husband says, oh, no, she gets historical. She will bring up everything I've done wrong for the last 25 years. And so men, our wives do have a stronger ability to remember things. And God has wired men to be more along the lines of sequential and logical thinking, where women are more along the lines of better with relational issues, okay? Now, when we look at the brain, Albert Einstein, you think about him and how intelligent he was, extremely high IQ. Did you know that Albert Einstein's brain weigh 2.71 pounds. Now, that's 10% smaller than the average brain, which is 3 pounds. However, the neuron density of his brain was greater than average. So when you think about the brain capacity, it is the neuron density that will determine your IQ. Now, when you look at humans, while they have the largest brain in proportion to their body weight of all animals, we don't have the biggest brains. That distinction belongs to the sperm whales, and they have a brain that weighs 17 pounds. So when we look at the brain can develop, the brain can grow. As a matter of fact, the part of the brain that's linked to memory, the hippocampus part of the brain, that's considered, again, the memory center. They've done a study, and they discovered that the more you use your memory, the stronger the hippocampus of your brain will become. So they discovered that cab drivers in London cab drivers, their brain power, their memory is significantly larger. Now, why is this? It is due to the fact of the mental workout that they get while navigating the 25,000 streets of London. So because they know all of these streets in London and have memorized all these streets, their brain is actually better at remembering things. So this gives you hope, right? I want you to know that if you will commit yourself to doing memory things like memorizing verses, you will learn that your brain can actually expand. And as we think about the subject that we're talking about today, peace, God speaks to us through our brain. Chronic stress and depression, they are running rampant in our modern lives. And as a result of pressure and stress, we can see that there's actually a measurable shrinkage of our brains. Since the late 1800s, the average IQ has gone down 1.6 points per decade for a total of 13.35 points. Now, technology has forced most of us to be multitaskers. But did you know that the brain really can't multitask? The brain can't learn or concentrate on two things at once. But what it can do, and this is what we confuse as multitasking, what our brains can do is our brains can toggle back and forth between tasks. In other words, we can do it real quickly, right? So we're thinking we're doing two things at once, but in reality, we're only doing one thing. So attempting to multitask, did you know, can temporarily reduce your IQ by up to 15 points? Now, unexpectedly, millennials, that is anybody that is born between 1981 and 1996, right? That's where most of my children were born. 3 out of my 5 children were born in 1996 or earlier. And so most of my kids are millennials. Did you know that they are more forgetful than the generation that precedes them? That's the baby boomers. They are more likely to forget what day it is or where they put their keys than their parents. Now, as I think about this, I forget why this is true. Just kidding. The reason it is true is because, and you can understand this, right? You can relate to this. When we started our church back almost 27 years ago, I knew everybody's phone number. This was before everybody had a cell phone. Now, some people had cell phones back then, but most people did not. And so you had to remember everybody's phone numbers, right? And so I would memorize phone numbers and license plates, and I would remember what car people drove. Well, now I have everybody's number in my phone. So I don't know anybody's phone number, really. Now, I do know my wife's number because she's had that same number forever. But my kids' phone numbers, I got to think about those. And I probably don't know them off the top of my head. I got to go to my cell phone to get their number. So as a result of not using our memories, we are actually becoming more forgetful. And now, the brain is an amazing gift that God has given to us. Over 140 protons in the brain are negatively impacted by the overexposure to electromagnetic frequencies. Those are the kinds that are emitted by your cell phones and other electronic devices. So, in the name of good brain health, I want to encourage you to limit, your use of electronic devices. When we look at how God has given us a sense of direction, relying on GPS to navigate, did you know it actually destroys your innate sense of direction? This is a skill that took, our ancestors thousands of years to develop, and we're starting to undo that because we have become so dependent upon GPS. And so when we think about this whole subject, how can we have peace if peace begins in our mind? Well, there's a lot of choices that we can make. Americans are facing what I would call a choice explosion. We have so many choices, right? Well, not too long ago, a researcher asked 100 American college students, and then they asked 100 Japanese college students to take out a piece of paper. And on one side of the paper, they wrote down the decisions in their life that they would like to make for themselves. On the other side, they wrote the decisions that they would like to pass on to others. So a blank sheet of paper, on one side, you're going to write down all the decisions that you would like to make for yourselves. On the other side, you want to have all the decisions that you'd like to have other people make for you. Did you know that the American college students filled up the side for decisions they want to make for themselves? They took that front sheet and it was full. These are all the decisions I want to make for myself. Where to live, what job to take. The other side for the American college students was almost blank. The only decision they commonly wanted to hand off to others was the day I die or when I die. And now the Japanese college students, on the other hand, they filled up the back side of the sheet with things they wanted others to decide. And what were they? They wanted other people to decide what time they woke up, others to decide what they did at their job. Now, Americans desired choice in 4 times more domains than the Japanese. So when we look at this was done by a New York Times columnist, or David Brooks actually writes about this experiment. He says there is a choice explosion. Americans now have more choices over more things than any other culture in human history. We can choose between a broad array of food, media sources, lifestyles, even identities. In some ways, this is a positive trend. But David Brooks also cautions that it's becoming increasingly and incredibly important to learn to decide well. So if you're going to be living at peace in your mind, that's where peace takes place, then as a follower of Christ, we must understand how we should process, how we should think. Every thought that comes through your mind is not a good thought, is not necessarily a true thought. Just because you think it doesn't mean it's so. So Paul tells us in Romans chapter 12, one of my favorite passages in the Bible. We're going to look at verse number 2. Romans 12, verse number 2, Paul says, "Do not be conformed to the pattern of this world, but instead be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Then you'll be able to test and approve what God's will is, his good, pleasing, and perfect will." So when we look at this here, Paul is giving us a reminder that as believers in Christ, we don't fall into the cookie cutter pattern of the world. Why? Because we've been transformed. We're different. And we're different because our minds are being renewed. And when our minds are like Christ, then we know what God's perfect will is, his good, pleasing, and perfect will is. Now, you can miss the will of God if your mind is not transformed. That's why I see so many Christians, and I'm wondering why they're making such poor decisions with their lives, because their minds have never been renewed. They're thinking like the world, they're going after the pattern of the world, but they're not being renewed in their mind. So we got to have a mind reset, right? Now, there's 3 reasons resetting my life begins with changing my mindset. And here's the first reason. My thoughts direct my life. Proverbs 4:23. Be careful how you think. Your life is shaped by your thoughts. Now, one of the reasons why we get mentally fatigued is because there's a battle in our brains that's going on 24 hours a day. It's debilitating because it's so intense. And it's intense because your mind is your greatest asset. Now, Satan knows this, and he wants your greatest asset. He wants to get into your thought life. He wants to get into your mind. So manage your mind, because that is the key to peace and to happiness. An unmanaged mind leads to tension. A managed mind leads to tranquility. An unmanaged mind leads to conflict. A managed mind leads to confidence. An unmanaged mind leads to stress. When you don't try to control your mind and the way that you direct your thoughts, you will have an enormous amount of stress in your life. But a managed mind leads to strength and security. Look what Paul says on this subject in Romans chapter 8, verse number 6. He says, letting your sinful nature control your mind leads to death. But letting the Spirit control your mind leads to life and to peace. And I'm going to make a statement that at first you may disagree with, but if you ponder on it, I think you'll agree with what I'm saying. Did you know that God is more interested in changing my mind, having my mind conform to Him? He's more interested in changing my mind than He is in changing my circumstances. You see, so many times we think, wow, if I just had a better job, if I just had a better spouse, if I just had a better house, if I just had a better opportunity or more opportunities, if I just had a stronger mind, right? My life would be different. Listen, God doesn't want you to have a different circumstance. He wants you to think different. Has it ever occurred to you that God has got you strategically right where you are so that He can work through you and He can use you in a tremendous way? Listen, when God works in our lives, He wants to change our thoughts because that will direct your life. Here's the second point, or the reason why resetting my mind must begin with a change of mindset. Because my struggles all happen in my mind. Romans 7:22 and 23. For in my inner being, I delight in God's law. But Paul says, you know what? I see another law at work in me, waging war against the law of my mind and making me a prisoner to the law of sin that is at work within me. So your struggles happen in your mind. When you think about that, think about stress. Isn't it amazing? I was thinking about this the other day. I do not like to fly. I make no bones about it. I get on an airplane as infrequently as possible, and I don't like to fly. I don't look forward to flying. My wife, on the other hand, she loves to fly. So if my wife and I are traveling together, we have two people in the very same circumstance, in the same airplane, sitting next to each other, right? She's over there reading a book or sitting back and enjoying the flight. For her, it's a very peaceful flight. For me, it's a stressful experience, right? I'm sitting in there wondering, how am I going to get out of this thing? What's going to happen if this plane goes down? I'm thinking about all the bad things that could happen. Well, this is a struggle that's in my mind. We're both in the same circumstance. She's at rest and I'm stressed, all because of the way my mind is working. So I'm going to ask you to join me tomorrow because we're going to continue this subject of peace involves choice. And I'm going to give you the acrostics for the word think so that you will know how to think. We're going to continue on this subject tomorrow, so please join me tomorrow on this fine station at the same time. In closing, I want to invite you to Hickory Ridge Community Church. We're so excited about the things that the Lord is doing through our academy, Hickory Ridge Academy, and through our church. I would like to personally invite you to come worship with us this Sunday at 9 o'clock and 10:45. And we have a children's ministry that we call the Ridge Kids, and they have a program called Elevate every Sunday morning for the children. We have a nursery and a preschool. We have an amazing Ridge Students ministry for our teenagers, and lots of good things are happening at Hickory Ridge Community Church. And men, every second Saturday morning at 7 a.m., we have an amazing breakfast. So come and join us I have local pastors, local church leaders in the Hampton Roads area that come give us an amazing word of encouragement. So men, mark it on your calendar, the second Saturday of the month at 7 a.m. at Hickory Ridge Community Church. We have an amazing men's breakfast that we have been doing now for 20 years. So come join us and get a high cholesterol breakfast and a great fellowship, a great lesson from God's Word. Well, thank you for joining me today. I'll be with you tomorrow for part 2, Peace Involves Choice. If you'd like to hear this broadcast again, you can have a free download at buzzsprout.com/1890557, or you can listen on Amazon, Spotify, Google Podcast, and Apple Podcast.
Hickory Ridge Community Church is located at 3320 Battlefield Boulevard South in Chesapeake, Virginia. Sunday service times are 9 a.m. and 10:30 a.m. We'd love for you to join us. For more information, go to hrcc7.org. And remember, no matter what you're going through, in Jesus Christ there is always hope for your heart.